Mayor and Council to the March 8th council briefing. We have 3 items to go over with you tonight. The first item is going to be a review of the annual CAFR, the Consolidated Annual Financial Report for fiscal year 2020. We do have representatives from our auditing team on the call with us tonight, and I will turn it over to Ashley Gossett, our Chief Financial Officer, to do some introductions before handing the reins over to them.
Hi, good evening. So each year the city undergoes an independent financial audit of its records. And the 2020 audit was completed by the certified public accounting firm Purvis Gray. Copies of the comprehensive annual financial report and financial statements for both redevelopment districts were provided to council for review last week. This is the first year that we are producing financial statements for our redevelopment districts. So here tonight, we've got Ryan Tucker and Megan Camp to discuss their reports and answer any questions you might have. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan, who's presenting via audio this evening.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I won't have my video on tonight because I've been in a bit of a dog walking accident, and it resulted in 32 stitches to the face. And for your sake, I don't think anybody wants to see me right now, but I have a broken nose that has to be surgically repaired tomorrow. So better days are ahead, I think. So, but we're here to present the results of the audit. And let me see if I can bring this up and share my screen with y'all. All right, can y'all see this comprehensive annual financial report? All right. Well, first of all, I'm Ryan Tucker. I'm a partner with Purvis Gray and Company. Megan Camp is also here with me. She was the manager on the engagement team. We'd like to thank Ashley and her accounting team for their cooperation during the course of the audit, being responsive to all of our requests. There's a lot that goes into this, putting this together, and it helps when they're, very responsive and cooperative with us. It helps the audit go very smoothly. So we appreciate that. We usually bring a team of 4 to 5 auditors out for approximately 3 weeks on site. Now this year with COVID, we tried to dial that back and have a couple people work remotely this year, and that worked out pretty well. And so we usually come out in September for some preliminary audit field work where we do some testing and review of internal controls. And then we would come back in December for 2 weeks and work on the year-end balances and so forth. And then we would go write up the financial statements and produce a draft for management to go through. And then we go through our internal review process. And now we're here. The audit process will conclude with the presentation and acceptance by the governing body. As you know, the accounting department has been in the midst of an ERP conversion. The utility billing and the payroll and fixed asset modules have not yet been converted to Munis. So there's been a lot of duplication of effort that has to go on with the old system and the new system. So it's just more time consuming than it ordinarily would be, and sometimes can create difficulties. They had a couple of issues last year, if you recall. One was on the bank reconciliation process. That has been resolved. So that was good news. And but there is one more item that carried a continuation item that carries into this year that they are still working on, and we'll touch on that. You may also remember that last year's audit, we had to do a federal single audit, which is required when you have more than $750,000 of federal or state expenditures. We did not have to do that this year. You didn't meet the threshold. The city didn't meet the threshold, so no single audit was required. So that was good. And then this year was the first year, as Ashley mentioned, that Florida statutes now require the CRAs to have a separate audit report issued. And so we'll go through those reports briefly. And there were a couple of additional audit requirements there that have been in regards to all the transparency and accountability related to the CRAs that have been passed by the legislature over the last couple of years. But first, we'll go through the CAFR, just a couple of highlights. This is a 140-page report. I won't go through every page and bore you to tears, but just a couple of things we thought were notable. And then if you guys have any questions, we'll be glad to try and answer it. The first thing here you can see on the screen, of course, is the Certificate of Achievement of Excellence in Financial Reporting. This is based on last year's CAFR. The report gets sent off to GFOA, and they go through it in detail along with another CPA in practice from another state who also goes through it to make sure that it conforms with all the GFOA's and government accounting standards, all of the requirements. And this has been a long-term project for the city. They've gotten this award for many, many years, and hope to continue to get that. As far as our report, let me flip over to that. This is one of the more important things in the document. It's where we issue our opinion on the financial statements. And this just identifies the year that we audited, of course, September 30th, 2020, and some of management's responsibilities and our responsibilities as far as the audit goes. And our opinion here is at the top of page 2. And it basically said that these financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with GAAP. So this is what's referred to as an unmodified opinion, the highest level of assurance that you can receive from a CPA firm. So that was good. Let's see here. Next, we have management's discussion and analysis, and Ashley and her team put this together. And it just gives some highlights from financial highlights with a comparison against the previous year. It's the only place in this document that's required to be comparative. And so it's kind of nice to go touch on a couple of the numbers here. If you look at total revenues, now this is citywide. You've got your governmental activities on the left and business type activities there in the middle, and then a total citywide. And just so one thing about these numbers is they are on the full accrual basis of accounting. So not really like your budget, the way you put it together. But this includes depreciation like a business would. Maybe do a conversion process to get these on the full accrual basis of accounting. So it's not exactly what you would see during the budget process, but just looking at a few highlights here, citywide total revenues were up by $2 million right here. And that the percentage is pretty small, 1.4%, but there were increases in charges for services. About $500,000 was due to an increase in play at the golf course. And then that was on the business type activity side. And then on the governmental activity side, there was a large payment in lieu of parking that was collected for a new development that was going in, which was about $600,000 that wasn't there in the prior year. Property taxes were increased by about $2.6 million. It was mostly due to property tax values going up. And then also a reduction in the amount the South End CRA returned to the taxing authorities compared to the previous year. Interest income, you can see, was down, and that was due to falling interest rates compared to the previous year. The prior year was a banner year in terms of interest and investment income. On the expense side, you can see that expenses were fairly consistent with the prior year, except total expenses were down by $2 million. This is primarily from the electric utility. Power costs were down by about $2.7 million. And there were some significant repair costs on the Roads and Streets division. in 2019 that you didn't have in 2020. So that resulted in the lower expenses. Overall, the city, of course, is in good shape and end of the year in good financial shape. This is a time, that you need to have a strong financial position, particularly for a beach community that has had back-to-back hurricanes and a pandemic. It's nice to be in stable financial footing, and that's where the city is. If you want to see how the general fund did, we'll flip over. This is the general fund budget versus actual. So this is what you would see during the budget process. And the actual numbers are compared to budget with a variance over on the right. And you can see that revenues came in better than budget in most categories, except for taxes and intergovernmental. And then on the expense side, expenses came in under budget in all departments. So all the departments held the line pretty well. At the end of the day, there was a surplus of about 540,000 positive net change in fund balance in the general fund. So not a huge change there. Now the notes to the financial statements, there's all kinds of information. Someone have a question?
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. There's all kinds of information in the notes to the financial statements, but one in particular is on long-term debt. And pretty soon here, this was, as of that time, you really only had one more payment to make on your revenue bonds in the utility funds. So that has since been paid off. And what's left is your accrued compensated absences, OPEB liabilities, and net pension liabilities. So no external long-term debt will be there going forward next year. And some of these debt disclosures, there are a couple of pages of debt disclosures here, will go away. So that was good news. As far as the net pension liabilities, we have to, the actuaries have to project what the pension liabilities are, and then they compare that to what's in the plan. And the general plan is at a net pension liability of 16.1 million, and that is about, let's see here, I've got it somewhere. It's about 78%, I believe, funded. And then the police plan is a $3.2 million liability. And that is 88% funded. And then the fire plan, which we had to make a couple of disclosures on that. At that time, it was a $5.3 million liability, 72% funded. But of course, we've made some disclosures about the converting, closing the plan, and the city going to be paying that liability off over the next 10 years with payments of 10 years of payments of 700,000 roughly. So that liability will come down and disappear over the next 10 years. One thing that is interesting about these plans that is a required disclosure, all of these disclosures are required by government accounting standards, and they want you to disclose the sensitivity of the discount rate. If you change the discount rates when they're measuring these liabilities, if you increase it by 1 or decrease it by 1, what would happen? And there's an inverse relationship in that. And so you can see what happens to these liabilities for each one if these assumptions are changed. They're very sensitive to these assumptions. So that's a required disclosure in the financial statements. The other thing I was going to mention is we have some reports that we issue in the back of the report. This is one of the more important ones here. It's a report on internal control. And if you remember this one from last year, this is where we had a significant deficiency related to the bank reconciliations. That finding has been resolved, and there were no internal control findings that were considered to be significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. So that was very good. And in the management letter, we did have this continuation finding here, which was related to work orders in the electric utility system. And there are some old work orders that they're still trying to work through. They made a lot of progress this year in closing many of those out, but they're still working through 2018 and 2019 to get those closed out and depreciating in your system. The ultimate impact was not considered material. So, but they are making good progress on that and hope to have it cleaned up by this time next year. So management has gone through and issued their response to the letter. This is required by the Auditor General's office for them to respond to our finding, and they've issued their response. Next, we have the downtown. Let's see if I can pull this one up. This is the standalone report for the downtown redevelopment district.
Before we go on to that, can I ask a question about the previous document?
Sure. Yep.
Can you drill down on the intergovernmental revenues? I think that showed us a deficit in that. Am I seeing that properly?
Yeah, on the budget to actual schedule.
Yes.
Let me go back to that. Page 44 of the PDF. Here we go. Intergovernmental. Yeah, you came in a little bit lower than what you had budgeted in that one on the revenue side.
Do we know how that happens?
Ashley could probably answer it. These are all just projections, and maybe Ashley might remember. I don't recall specifically.
I can speak to that. So the intergovernmental revenues in the general fund, those are our state sharing revenues. And with COVID-19, the state basically cut their normal distribution in half toward the end of the year because it was uncertain how much they would collect. So we were seeing that decrease as well as they cut the remittance to us in half for several months from May to June.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so this is the downtown district standalone audit report. And there's just a couple of things to mention here. Of course, we had a clean opinion on this report as well. They have to issue and prepare MD&A. So there's a full set of financial statements, a government-wide conversion. You have the fund level statement. There's really just one fund for us to audit on this. But Ashley and them still have to put together MD&A, and there's a couple of highlights in MD&A. And as you can, there's a 2-year comparison in MD&A. And so basically revenues came in a little bit better than last year. 4.9% increase and basically because of property values increasing. Expenses were down, usually due to timing of these infrastructure projects that are going on during that time. So that was the result for that particular fiscal year. There's a whole set of notes, for the CRA. And it kind of talks about the history of it and when it's set to expire. And we did have lots of discussion about whether or not these the employees that work for the CRA, they're not actually employees of the CRA. And so we didn't have to allocate any of these pension liabilities or OPEB liabilities or anything like that to this set of standalone financial statements. And also we had lots of discussions with management about what fixed assets need to be reported on these financial statements, these standalone financial statements. But what was ultimately decided was only the assets that are titled to the CRA, which is some land. There's about $6.8 million of land that's actually owned by the CRA. The rest of the improvements are really contributed to the city upon completion. There's some construction commitments out there. And the remaining commitment there. These are, purchase orders that are open essentially. And then there is a budget versus actual statement here as well. And it came in better than budget on the revenue side and came in under budget on the expense side for these categories in total. We did have to, the Auditor General came up with some rules about, in Florida statutes about that they want the auditors to look at. And this is a report that we had to put together here, compliance with section 163, 387. And some of the things that we had to look at are whether the CRA's expenditures were spent on actual CRA projects and not, something else that were identified in the CRA plan, whether they stayed within budget, whether there's any excess funds that needed to be returned to the taxing authorities or reappropriated to specific projects. One of the other requirements that we've determined to be applicable to the next fiscal year is regarding the CRA's budget. And any budget amendments, they have to be submitted to the taxing authorities within 10 days of approval by the CRA. So that'll be something we're looking at next year. So there was, at the end of the day, there were no findings to report in the management letter, internal control letters on that one, on the downtown. Let me pull up the South End report. And unmodified opinion on this one as well. Clean opinion. And a comparison of revenues and expenses to last year. You may remember that last year they had to return, a significant amount of the taxing in 2019, tax increment funds. So that basically zeroed out those. And then this year it was a much smaller amount that had to be returned to the taxing authorities. On the expense side, there was the Southwest Channel Improvement Project that was going on in 2020. Then there's a budget versus actual report on page 23 of the PDF, and you came in over budget on the revenue side and under budget on the expense side. And there were no findings in any of our reports as far as the internal control or compliance with Florida statutes that we had to look at. So that was a good, clean report for the two CRAs, their first time going through the whole process by themselves and having to look at some new things there. And then we're going to have Megan go through our required communications letter real quick. I'll pull that up.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. As Ryan stated, my name is Megan Camp, and I was the manager on this job. The SAS 114 communication letter is simply a letter that's required by the professional auditing standards, and it allows us to communicate to those charged with governance certain matters about how the audit went, general aspects of the audit and the reports on the whole. If you see on the first page, we discuss the responsibility of management for the selection and use of appropriate accounting policies. And that's after a general description of the engagement, which is what Ryan just discussed through the report. We discuss general estimates, the important or significant estimates that factor into the final financial reports for the entity. On the next page, well, you'll see the significant estimates in a city of this size usually extend a few pages. After that, we discuss an upcoming accounting pronouncement, and this will be GASB 87 related to leases. We have already discussed potential impacts with the accounting staff, and they're in the process of determining how, if at all, the financial statements will be affected once this pronouncement becomes effective for the 2022 fiscal year end. We go ahead and reiterate that there were absolutely no difficulties encountered in performing the audit. You have a great accounting staff there, and we really appreciate all they do to help make everything go smoothly. The next item, as Ryan stated, there was a continuation of a finding from last year related to work orders not being closed out in a timely fashion. And this led to a projected misstatement in the financial statements. We were only able to estimate it. So it came out to about $222,000 in unrecorded accumulated depreciation on closed work orders that had not been closed out and depreciation begun on them. The depreciation expense was estimated to be $122,000 for the fiscal year under audit. These are, I know they sound like big amounts, but on the whole, these are not indicative of a material misstatement to the financial statements as reported. So we just passed on this adjustment since in general it was an estimate, and they are in the process of catching up all these past work orders. We had no disagreements with management related to the financial accounting or reporting. We did receive a representation letter from management related to certain items that we have to request management representations on. As far as we know, there were no management consultations with other independent accountants. And then we discuss other limited procedures that we applied against the MD&A and the required supplementary information within the financial statements. Again, we note that we did not audit these and we don't provide any assurance on those. They're not necessarily included in the opinion that Ryan gave. Let's see. And that's about it. We did issue SAS 114 letters for both of the CRAs as well as required. Does anyone have any question on these communications? Okay, Ryan, you can go ahead and take it back.
All right. Yeah, I think that kind of concludes what we wanted to go over with you. Be glad to dig into anything else. There's a lot of information, as you know, in the CAFR. It's a lot of good information. There's statistical information, 10-year information. We could spend all night going through it all, but I don't think y'all would appreciate that. But be glad to try and answer any questions you have.
Mike, I don't know if you're calling on people.
Yeah, I just noticed that you have your hand raised.
I just did it. I just wanted to say thank you, Ryan, for being here, even though we can't see you with everything you're going through, and Megan for this presentation, and Ashley and her team for working so hard to put this together. It's really nice to be a leader in this community when we feel very confident in how we're being fiscally managed, but to have a third party confirm that confidence. So this is always a really interesting read and presentation. I just really appreciate all the work that goes into it. Going back, we've heard about the work orders a couple of times. It seems like this might be, Ashley, maybe you can answer, we're kind of straddling the old ERP and the new ERP system. Is this something that can truly be resolved, or is it something that we're just going to kind of have to put a Band-Aid on until we get into that new system?
Unfortunately, I think it's going to be something we have to put a Band-Aid on, because the work order system is our fixed asset system that's unique to the electric utility. And until we select an asset management system for the electric, we're going to be having to import and export data between the old system and the new system. We've spoken between Beaches Energy, Finance, and Administration, and we've got some more folks kind of pointed at doing imports, exports, and analysis as we go to improve the process until we ultimately have a new system.
That sounds like fun. Thank you, Ashley, and good luck, Ryan, with your surgery, and hope for a speedy recovery.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Ashley, do you want to just tell council, especially since we have 3 new council members, what the next steps are now that we've gone through the CAFR presentation?
Sure. So as part of our charter, we say that we're going to do an independent audit and present it to council each year. So next council meeting, there'll be an agenda item for you to formally accept the financial reports for the city, the comprehensive annual financial report, and the 2 redevelopment districts. So you'll see that next week.
Thank you, Ashley. If there's no more questions on that topic, we will thank Ryan and Megan for joining us tonight.
Thank
You
you,
guys
guys.
are more than happy to exit the meeting if you so choose. Otherwise, you
Thank
get
you for your
to our
time.
next. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Okay, there we go. Back to our normal screen. Our second topic for tonight is chlorination alternatives for water and pollution control plant operations. We do have our Public Works Director on the call tonight to walk you through some of these issues. But just as a very quick background, the city currently uses compressed chlorine gas at each of our 3 facilities, the 2 water plants in the PCP, and Public Works is looking at some alternatives. And with that, Dennis, I will turn it over to you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Can everybody hear me? Okay. What you've got attached to tonight's memo is 2 technical reports that were produced by 4 Waters. The first technical report involves looking at chlorination alternatives for the water treatment plants. And the second alternative, or the second report, it deals with the PCP plant separately. The reason we did that is because PCP already has a chlorine scrubber, so it already has a form of mitigation that's identified in the water treatment plant. It's actually sitting better off than the water treatment plants are as of today. So I'll kind of forward you to page 28 of the first report, which is the summary page. What I'll kind of go through there is kind of what we're looking at total in the dollars and cents, and what kind of alternatives we're looking at. So all 3 alternatives, 1A, 1B, and 1C, all involve keeping chlorine gas as our disinfection alternative, and then trying to do the best thing we possibly can to mitigate any possible instances of a chlorine release. Alternative 2A deals with a change of chlorination material, which is a chemical change, which moves to sodium hypochlorite. And then alternative 2B deals with using sodium hypochlorite, but instead of utilizing bulk delivery, it utilizes a generation on site. So overall, when you look at the total, what they call total present worth, which is the bottom column, it pretty much tells you what your costs are going to be all in at the end of 20 years. So it kind of gives you a breakdown of if you spend the money now, where you're going to be and what's going to total cost is going to be rolled into 20 years. What they did not include in these was some of the costs we have with current chlorination chemical, as well as future chlorination chemical, which is not a huge cost overall in these amounts. What our recommendation for the water treatment plant is to convert to what they call alternative 2A, which is convert to utilizing a bulk shipment of sodium hypochlorite, which is a liquid, and get away from the gas completely. It's about a $500,000 capital cost to be able to do both plants. The year cost for chemical is about $42,000 a year, estimated based on our current usage. Now, some of these figures get a little weird because we have what our current usage rates are and then what we're actually permitted as capacity. So we run significantly less than our permitted capacity. I think our water treatment plant is at 6.5 million gallon produced, but we only usually run around 2. So obviously we don't produce as much as we possibly can in the event of expansion or total water use. The second report deals with the same thing at PCP. And since they already have a chlorine scrubber, theirs is on page 24 of the report, is their comparison chart. So this is where we looked at the same thing as switching over to the liquid chlorine, which is about $1 million capital cost. And the reasoning is because the amount of water and the way it flows through the PCP plant and how it has to be charged. So it has about $1 million construction cost, and then they estimate at the permitted cost of $376,000 per year at the permitted capacity. But I think your report shows the secondary figure, which is actually what we run. And I don't have the right report in front of me, of course, to show what that number is. So whereas you're comparing on the secondary report, you see this, of course, the on-site sodium hypochlorite generation, as well as the UV disinfection. And when you look at the 20-year rates, what you begin to see is the bulk sodium hypochlorite system at a 20-year rate is pretty darn close to the UV disinfection. One of our concerns with UV disinfection is it's kind of like the latest and greatest technology that's out there. There's still a lot of questions in how it functions and how well it functions. And instead of needing $1 million worth of capital to get it installed, it's needing upwards of almost $6.5 to $7 million worth of capital to get it installed. And then your costs go down because all you're using after that is electricity. So the costs are estimated at significantly cheaper overall, which is how it kind of pays itself back upon the initial bigger cost. What we're kind of looking for tonight is some direction to be able to look at converting all 3 of these plants away from gas chlorine, and thus reducing the risk management plan that we have to currently have in place, and reducing the risk to the city by being able to convert to a safer alternative. And what we would propose to do is include that as part of our CIP presentation to be able to include both of these projects. I think if you look back in last year's book, you'll see that it was already kind of entered into the water side. I think in year FY23, and I think we still plan on keeping it in there. We would like to be able to try to get through the design stuff next year that we need to, and then be able to actually bring it into construction in FY23 to help get around this risk as fast as we can. And if you've got any questions, I'll be more than happy to flip through and try to come up with any answers you may have.
Councilor Jansen.
Okay, I don't have any questions as much as for you, Dennis, as much as I just want to say to my fellow colleagues is that I really do support switching over to a liquid chlorine versus the gas. Done some reading on it once it was brought to my attention, and the risk that's posed to the city maintaining a gas chlorine base is it's a super high risk. And if we were to have some kind of incident happen, which you know how Murphy's Law works, it could really be costly to the city, much more than the switch over to chlorine. So I will be supporting the switch myself.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other hands or questions? If not, is there a general consensus for Dennis to move forward with placing projects in future CIP? I see heads nodding. Dennis, I think you've got the direction you're looking for.
Perfect. I will put those in the upcoming CIP and we'll see where they fall.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you very much. Appreciate.
With that being said, we will move on to the third item of the night, which is the review of Chapter 5 Animal Ordinance. You may recall at our last council meeting, there was additional information that was provided by Councilor Golding, and the charge to the city attorney and staff was to go back and to evaluate that information that was provided. I think that's referred to as the blue text document. So I'm going to turn the ball over to the city attorney at this point, and I believe we also have representatives for the police department on the call as well, in case there are any questions that we need to go through. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Evening. We only have Officer Tater. Riley couldn't make it and Eric couldn't make it. So it's Tanya and I to try to carry the load this time around. But they have been essential team members. They just couldn't be available tonight. So the last time that we met on this particular ordinance, council directed me to, and I asked for clarification and certainty on this, to review and provide our opinions and or make revisions to the ordinance based on what, as Mike said, we're calling the blue text memo, which Councilmember Golding provided that had blue text, because that was the easiest way for us to distinguish it from other memos. So then council, this was a memo that was provided to council, provided by Councilmember Golding, and then Mike was able to distribute it just close to the February 16th council meeting date. And some council members explained that they did not have time to review it sufficiently and asked me and the officers to go back, review it. We attached the blue text memo to your briefing agenda memo tonight. So that was the topic for tonight's briefing topic discussion. And we have attached the ordinance with our red line, so to speak, our red line additions. And Officer Tater and I could speak to the changes and responses that we have to the blue text document or the changes in the ordinance and then responses to the blue text document. But we were, I want to inform council that we were also provided with additional information subsequent to that, that Council Member Golding gave us on March 1st in an email and memorandum. And then we received more information this morning regarding quite a few number of topics on this. So we've received additional information from your colleague in the past 7 days that the officers and I have had no time to incorporate into our schedule. We haven't had a time to vet it or research it. And quite frankly, we haven't had any other time to even conference together because we scheduled the conference for the blue text document. So I want to advise you that we do have received substantial additional information from Ms. Golding. So we aren't even able to address that tonight. So I guess the first question is, do you want me to, or would you like us to postpone this again in order for us to provide you with all of the information and allow for the officers and I to try to find the time to research and vet that most recent information that we got in the past week? Or would you like us to proceed with the ordinance that was attached to your briefing memo and address the blue text document that was attached to your briefing memo?
Councilor Dumont.
I guess when you say substantial, how substantial? We need to put this to bed. And if we keep having more and more memos every time we have a memo to review, we're never going to get this done. So how substantial are the substantial? Are they just typos? Are they minor things? Can they be, I know you haven't had a time to really dig into it. Can it be somewhat easily addressed?
No, honestly, it cannot be somewhat easily addressed, and it's not just typos. It's much more than that. There are multiple sections that have substantive suggested information and changes. and would take a lot of research. And then as well, one of the member emails that we received 7 days ago, it was nearly 5 pages of different references to dozens of local jurisdictions throughout Florida for us to look into. So
Look, I'm just going to follow up really quick to try and, like I said, get this to bed. Is it possible to get this ordinance passed and then to revisit it with amendments in the future?
yes, that is possible. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
But just to remind council that it's currently at a 38-page ordinance because we revised one of the most lengthy chapters of the Code of Ordinances. So in order for us to amend it, keep in mind that the amendment would require us to cross-reference any other sections or uses of particular terms. So amendments in this regard for this very lengthy ordinance isn't as simple as other smaller ordinances. Because, for example, if we were to change a term or a definition, then we need to be sure the way that that term or definition is utilized or referenced at any other point within the entire chapter. So there are several steps to the amendment in this regard.
As a person who writes these things and you're the professional in this field, what would you suggest moving along and then doing possible complicated amendments in the future, or holding off to incorporate everything, to go through another workshop to eventually vote on something?
I suggest that we go forward because it was last year that our police department told me in hopes from where their perspective is in terms of their field work and the operators of this ordinance and the staff members that are relying on this ordinance. They told me last year, middle of last year, we really need a new chapter 5. So I'm looking at 9 months later, still not having a chapter 5 for them.
And we're looking at months in the future to actually incorporate more into this when we are getting into the busy season where we need this stuff, well, where the police department needs this now.
That's true. They've told me, absolutely correct. Yeah. They told me many, many months ago, please get us a new chapter 5.
Thank you.
I would like to piggyback on Ms. Dumont's comments, and thank you for starting that off. I think that we need to deal with the blue memo and get this thing up for a vote. We've put too much time and effort into this. It's mind-boggling that there's more information out there to come, and I'm sure that there is, but I think we need to get a good quality, workable and enforceable ordinance on the books, and let's go, because we have spent hours on this, and that's nothing to what's been happening below the surface with our staff, and we need to go ahead and get this done. So I would say blue memo and let's go, and new information we need to set aside for the next time we address this.
I've got 2 more hands raised. Councilor Golding, followed by Councilor Stokes.
Thank you, Mike. Just to explain to everybody, the additional information is in support of what I had provided in the blue memo. And I believe I shared with Mike the information about the attended tethering, which I believe he shared with all of you, because I had the attended tethering in the blue memo as something that I feel is important that we incorporate in our code. And at the time we had the briefing on the 25th, Officer Riley said that she didn't see that there would be an issue with incorporating the attended tethering, but to this date, it's not been incorporated. So I'm not really sure why that's happened. So I thought that if this needed to be something that the city council needed to provide consensus on, I would provide the memo, which Mike shared with you guys. The other thing that's the biggest issue to me is the fact that the pet sales ordinance has been changed, and those changes to me are very concerning to the animal shelter definition. And I don't feel comfortable with it at all based on what has happened in other parts of the United States. If there are loopholes that have been incorporated into some of the definitions. And so that is really the bulk of my concern and the information that I've provided to, because I didn't see the changes until we got the agenda. And so what I had put in the blue memo was I wanted to see the individual taken out of there, or the person in the animal shelter definition taken out, because that's significantly concerning, and it didn't get changed. So on the other hand, if we want to move forward, the other thing we can do is revert back to our original pet sales ordinance, because my biggest concern is that given the definition as it is today, there's still opportunity for a loophole. So my two main things are the pet sales ordinance and the attended tethering. The other things that I sent to Chris today were just trying to get some clarification, because, you know, we talked about persons bitten by dogs or cats, and there was a lot of discussion around that, and Mr. Stokes was involved in that, and you know, now I just had some questions, because when you look at it, that whole section isn't talking about being bitten by dogs or cats. Now it's talking about being bitten by any animal. So that I have a concern about that too. I don't know if that's, you know, we have a section 529 that's titled persons bitten by dogs or cats, but then the whole section's talking about being bitten by any animal. So I would say those are the main points of the information that I sent to Chris today, and that was based off of what we just got in our packet for the briefing. Now, I don't know, did the council have an opportunity to look at the attended tethering information that I provided you? Would the council have any, have any feeling about that? Because Jacksonville already has this on the books. I believe it's the right thing to do for the safety of our citizens, because dogs that are tethered 24/7 are more likely to become aggressive. And I think that's a big concern. Did everybody look at that information, and how does the council feel about what the city of Jacksonville has done and incorporating that in our code?
I looked at it. I have no problem incorporating it into the code. I agree. It's kind of a common sense thing. If you have a dog, you don't want to just tie your dog up and say you have a dog out in the yard 24/7 tethered. I would like the police department or Chris to note why it wasn't included. Was there a reason why it was? I know that Riley said that we don't have that problem right now, but for future issues, is there a reason why it wasn't included in this iteration?
Sure. So the tethering issue is on page 3 of the blue text memo, and we were going to talk about it, and Officer Tater was going to specifically talk about that. But if you'd like us to jump to that answer, then I'll turn it over to the officer, and she can address it. And I can tell you that in my conversation with Riley, Riley mentioned that she's only had 2 calls regarding tethering during her entire career. So at least that's what she shared with me. And then the rest we planned on turning over to Officer Tater. So if you'd like, Officer Tater can answer that portion of the blue text memo.
Do we want to go through have general comments and then go through the blue text memo point by point, or do we want to keep going back and forth?
I would say let's hear from Councilor Stokes. And if everyone's okay, then I would suggest that we walk through the blue text document and hear Chris and staff's response or recommendation on each of those items.
And that's what we were tasked with at the last meeting. So at least we can accomplish what we were directed to do for tonight's briefing. And then if we wanted to, with council's direction, put the ordinance up for first reading at the March 15th meeting, if council so directs, And also council could direct us to have an additional briefing or discussion on any of the additional information. So at least if we tackle the blue text memo tonight, it's what council wanted to have happen, at least at the last direction. Sorry, I think Councilmember Stokes was going to talk. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say the animal reference that Councilmember Golding mentioned was, I think it was domesticated animal instead of animal, if I remember correctly. And the other one, I just wanted to speak for a moment on the tethering one. Really would like to get that one put in. Just little story behind it is during the campaign, I was actually bit by a dog that was tethered on the front porch, and there is no way to see the dog out there. There's nobody home. It was kind of a scary moment for me. I didn't really know the 529 code at the time. And, you know, it took a lot of digging to figure that out. But if this kind of attended tethering would have been on the books, an incident like that or something that happened to me worse could have been prevented. So just wanted to put that out there, that's something I really feel strongly about getting put in. Thanks.
With that being said, Chris, why don't you start walking through the blue text modification?
All right, here we go, blue. So the first item is the definition for animal shelter. And we looked at the blue text provided by Councilmember Golding and then ours, and we added a sentence that you'll see in the red line that says this definition, the definition of animal shelter, does not include breeders or animals obtained from a breeder. So that's what our officers felt was adequate for their purposes to add that portion to the sentence.
Hey, Chris, can I ask, because in the blue text, I had mentioned that I felt that the person needed to be removed from animal shelter. Is there any explanation why we would not remove a person? Because based on the input that we've gotten also since then, at least I got an email from Elizabeth Orrick, who's with Best Friends. She reiterated the concern that animal rescue organizations should cover people who would be, you know, adopting out animals, and that an individual or a person should not be included in an animal shelter definition.
Yes, and Officer Tater can answer that a little better.
Chris, you went mute on us.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
I'll have Officer Tater answer that, and she can log on and answer that question. But while she's answering, I'm going to find an additional reason that Riley gave me as well. So go ahead. Sorry, I went mute there for a little bit.
Hi, everybody. Can y'all hear me? Okay. In reference to the animal shelter, in reference to a person, the way it currently reads now also includes midway down into it, or actually, just let me read the whole thing real quick. Animal shelter means any public or private organization existing for the purpose of the prevention of cruelty to animals and for the sheltering of animals, is incorporated or chartered under the laws of the state of Florida or established by legislation, and also includes a person who rescues, shelters, or provides a foster home facility, any of which places animals for adoption, whether for a fee, a donation, or for free. This definition does not include breeders or animals obtained from a breeder. So what we discussed is the reason that the person is in there, because anybody that is starting to adopt a shelter or a rescue is why we want to keep person in there, so we don't basically shut down anybody that's wanting to come in and adopt animal rescue shelter. And that's why we decided to keep person in there, so that we would give other people opportunity to come in and develop these companies, obviously through the legal means of getting permits and such. So this would be something that we would watch, and not just allow anybody to go in and adopt being a shelter, so to speak.
Well, and that's the part that's the most concerning to me, because if you have sham organizations that are actually puppy mill, or, they're actual puppy mills or whatever, they're, they can actually exploit that loophole. So, I mean, honestly, I think that we don't have a lot of organizations that are in the process of forming or whatever, but typically, if they are, to me, I just feel like it's dangerous to have a potential loophole in there just to give some of these organizations an opportunity to get their 501c3 when it's creating a loophole.
Okay, I understand, respect your view on this. However, keep in mind that through this entire ordinance, Chapter 5 ordinance, there are other areas that would address this. So if one area isn't very specific as far as verbiage, there's another area that will address certain things. And as far as vetting a company or a person that wants to come in and create a company, that's where we have to fall back on everybody's expertise as to what will or will not happen as far as allowing this person to come in. And as far as puppy mills, as long as I've been here, we have not had any puppy mills. So I think we're doing something somewhat right, but I can understand your concerns there.
Yeah, they're actually, the puppy mills are coming from out of state basically, but breeders and brokers can get the puppy mills can get the puppies from out of state puppy mills. And then they can say that and that's the problem that happened out in California. They can say, oh, but I fit under this animal shelter definition, and don't worry, everything's good, but they're getting their puppies from a puppy mill out of state.
I guess I don't even know what I'd phrase this as. More of a hypothetical question, I believe is how I'm going to put it. So the concern that Sandy has is that if we have individual in the definition, that an individual could be a go-between between a breeder and the store that's selling the animals. I'm looking at it as what's to stop that individual from forming a sham, that's your words, a sham organization, from forming a sham nonprofit that says that it's a rescue mill, which would then fit into this definition. So there's nothing to do. I think we really have to rely on the expertise and the ability of the police department. So what I'm going to ask specifically regarding this, and this is on the record because it's all public record, the intention of the definition is to close any loopholes from puppy mills while being flexible enough to still allow those organizations that are developing as rescue organizations to be able to participate in finding forever homes for all the dogs and cats and whatever other animals. Legally, do we have protection if you had a sham individual come in and say, nope, I'm an individual, I fall into this definition of who's allowed to sell animals because I'm an individual and not a puppy mill?
Yeah,
So
we have a section of our code we're going to get to that further down in the blue text memo as well. But we have an entire section where puppy mills are prohibited, and it's pretty explicit. So what I would say is, with the in the field, if with the investigation the officers determine and decide this is a prohibited puppy mill, then we would shut them down. We would give them the reasons why. If they wanted to challenge us, then they're going to challenge us based on our code language and their factual arguments against our code. So yeah, I mean, we have the legal basis to shut them down based on what our officers' investigation reveals. And we move forward with what their position is in terms of their investigation. And it's supported by our code that it's a prohibited puppy mill.
And so, but that's if the puppy mill is in the city. What happens if the puppy mill is in Georgia and you have an individual who's saying, I found a puppy, here's a puppy, just happens to be a purebred. And here's the individual gives the purebred puppy to the animal store. What do they call it? Pet stores, to sell that puppy. Does this language allow us to stop that individual who would fall under the definition of individual of who's allowed to sell or provide animals to a pet store? If they're, because the puppy mill's not in Jack's Beach, the puppy mill would be somewhere else. But what if you suspect that this pet store is getting a lot of purebreds all of a sudden? How would you shut that down?
Let's see here.
So can I suggest something that I think would solve this, if you guys would consider it, for both the animal rescue organization and for the animal shelter, to make sure that it says that, okay, you say it does not breed animals or obtains animals from a breeder or broker, and that would close the loophole. So both the animal rescue group and the animal shelter, if we say they do not breed animals, nor do they obtain them from a breeder or a broker, then that would close the loophole for the question that Ms. Dumont just asked. Because the brokers are a big issue too. The brokers are the people that are in between the puppy mills. So they're the ones that are getting them from the puppy mills, and then they turn around and then they sell them to the pet stores. So we need to close that breeder and broker loophole.
I think we can add that. Do you think so, Tanya?
I mean, I'd be fine with leaving the individual in there if you want to keep the individual in the animal shelter definition, but I really feel it needs to say that they do not breed animals, nor do they obtain the animals from a breeder or a broker.
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay. All right. Great. That'd be perfect.
Everybody good with that language? See lots of heads nodding.
Okay. So we'll include that on the, again, if council wants this first reading, which would be the third first reading, if you want this on March 15th, we'll have that added.
For both animal rescue and for animal shelter, because that needs to be, like Ms. Dumont said, they could say they're an animal rescue too, and they could still get the pets from a broker.
Got it. So the next topic was, in the blue text memo, was cruelty and the definition of it. And so we added a sentence to that definition that simply incorporates the entirety of the Chapter 828 Florida statutes definition of cruelty. So we maintained our cruelty definition and incorporated the Florida statutes definition of cruelty in our code. Next is the topic of home quarantine. And so home quarantine will need a specific explanation from our officer as it applies to our jurisdiction and not City of Jacksonville and NOAA and any other jurisdiction. So Tanya and Riley have good reasons and discussion points on keeping the home quarantine as they have it. So I'll let Tanya take that with respect to explaining your case by case and the way that your jurisdiction deals with home quarantine.
Okay, so with home quarantine, we've actually been doing this for a long time. It's the discretion of the officer. It's going to also depend upon the nature of the injury as far as severity. And that's going to be, once we do our research as far as whether it's animal control or one of our actually sworn officers that is doing it, because animal control doesn't work 24/7. So sometimes officers are obligated to do these investigations till they can hand it over to animal control. With that being said, depending upon what we find out in the investigation, whether there's a means to quarantine the animal, and we feel that this person's going to take it seriously and actually quarantine the animal, Also depends upon if they attack their next door neighbor. We're not going to say do home quarantine if the neighbor's right next door. We're going to take that animal to animal control and quarantine it there. So it really is on a case by case basis, depending upon the nature of the attack or the bite, so to speak. Does that make sense to everybody?
See heads nodding, but I also see a hand raised by Counselor Jansen.
I was just going to say that we shouldn't take the discretion away from the officers. I've dealt with this over a considerable amount of years, and I think that Tanya's right. Each situation is a case by case basis. I've done it with snakes. I've done it with dogs, cats, all kinds of animals, and some that were considered pets, some that weren't illegal pets. So it's I think we keep the discretion in the hands of the officer.
Counselor Golding?
Absolutely. And the whole reason that I included the blue text from Neptune Beach in there is because it's basically just codifying what we're doing. And if you look at the text, it does say that it's used when a bite occurs and at the discretion of the animal control officer for the safety of health, for the safety and health reasons of animals and people. So I'm really just asking for us to codify what we're doing because it does put the discretion. I mean, it definitely codifies that at the animal control officer's discretion. Because as I said before, you know, Riley's doing a great job, but if Riley's not here, I'd like to know that we have this in the code. So future animal control officers would know that they have the ability to do home quarantine because, you know, not everybody may be as proactive as Riley is.
So I'll add that Riley shared with me, you know, much of what Tanya just shared, and that Riley would feel more comfortable with not having Neptune Beach's definition, because sometimes when you get a particular definition, it's a framework that you have in a code or a statute, ordinance or statute, you have to operate within that framework. With not having home quarantine added to her definitions that she has to operate strictly within that framework, she loses some of her ability to exercise her discretion. And she has rare occasions where she has to exercise such discretion, but you can actually lock your hands if you put too much into an ordinance in terms of an officer. So, you know, our officers have very broad discretion on how to conduct themselves with respect to their police regulatory law enforcement actions. They're given a great deal of discretion. Sometimes, as Riley indicates, it's more important for her to have that discretion rather than to be locked into a particular home quarantine definition that Neptune Beach feels is right for them, but she doesn't feel it's right for her. But I do understand, you know, Riley's not always going to be our perfect officer to be here. There will be others. I just wanted to convey that from Riley.
Counselor Dumont.
Thank you. I understand Sandy's concern. You don't write your ordinances for the staff you have, you write it for the future. That said, I see this more as a training issue and training of animal control officers and letting them know what their options are versus something that needs to be codified, at least at this time. As long as whomever would come after Riley is trained in the same way that Riley was trained, I'm comfortable with not having this in there.
Counselor Golding.
I'm just going to say I'm not going to die on this hill. You know, I'm going to pick my battles. I don't agree. I don't feel that this is tying Riley's hands, but I respect Riley's feelings on this. And so let's move on to the next item.
Okay, next item. Next item is the definition of person. And so the blue text has suggested the Atlantic Beach definition. And what the officers and I did was to essentially change our definition of person so that it matches Atlantic Beach's definition. And we provided a red line version of that. And then if there's no questions on that or any discussion, the next item in the blue text memo on page 2 is severe injury or severely injured definition. And we have actually decided to keep ours because keep our definition as it is, because quite frankly, the Florida statute definition is deficient in my judgment. It doesn't technically, the Florida statute requires that a severe injury constitutes broken bones. So multiple bones. If you have to do a strict reading and strict construction of statutory definitions, their definition is not as complete or sufficient or adequate as ours is. So I suggested to our officers that the way the Florida statute reads is this severe injury, you have to have one or more broken bones. But I like our definition is very clear, one or more broken bones. So we say that specifically. The Florida statute seems to indicate that you have to have multiple broken bones. We just didn't want to cause any other confusion. We kept it very simple with our statute, with our definition versus the Florida statute.
Thank you for the explanation, Chris. I just always tend to err on the side of what the state statute has. And so that's the reason I asked that question, because I just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to cause ourselves any problems by having something different. But if you're happy with what we have, then that's great. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. And I get paid to read every single word. So and in for example, micromobility devices and the Florida statutes, and that's another topic coming up for council soon. I do actually rely on the Florida statutes throughout that document in support of our definitions. So I agree. I usually go straight to it, and staff around here will say, yeah, well, Chris usually goes straight to the Florida statute definition, not on this one. So we didn't make any change. So the next topic is code revision. So out of the definition section, the into code revisions, the blue memo suggested some changes to 5-29, persons bitten by dogs or cats. We made some changes in our 5-29. And we made some improvements and corrections by changing the language that was suggested in the blue memo. And we now changed it to Duval County Health Department throughout 5-29. And Riley said that that was accurate. And that was we improved it there. So the blue, so the blue memo helped. We changed that. And we didn't make any other changes other than that. But under 5-292, we added a portion, the last sentence of fees that were suggested in the blue memo. That seemed to work for our officers and for what our purposes are and our intent behind this. So we added that. We made no other changes. The next section is 5-42. Requirements for, yeah.
I'm sorry. Just a question, because this goes back to the briefing on the 25th where Chet was talking with Riley about using domesticated animal instead of dog and cat. So I guess this is a question for Riley, because are we getting into an area that we really don't want to get into if we say that you're bitten by any animal, or versus a domesticated animal? Because the discussion was about domesticated animal on the 25th. So it's something that concerns me a little bit. Do we really want to go that direction and require that any bite by any animal? Because that could be, anything, right?
Yeah.
not
it's
just
any-
a dog or a cat or a ferret. So that's why I also had the comment in there about the domesticated animal.
Yeah. Tanya, do you want to make any comment on that?
Sure. The reason behind that is because even though feral cats don't have owners, so to speak, if a person is bitten by a feral cat and we're able to catch it, then we can monitor it, which goes to health reasons for a person. Because if we monitor and find out it's showing no signs of rabies, then the person doesn't have to go through painful rabies treatment. So in that case, that's not a domesticated animal, but we would still attempt to capture it and keep an eye on it for health purposes.
But I think technically a cat is considered domesticated, right? So I would have thought a feral cat, you know, that it would just be cat or dog, right? Whether it's feral or not, it's a cat. So but that's fine. You know, I
What
just
if you
wanted
had
to
a-
follow up.
What if you had a pet snake, like a python?
I personally would not want to catch or keep the snake. That's just a personal opinion. However, I don't know enough about that. That would be Riley's expertise in reference to the snakes. But I know, like with raccoons, if a person's bitten by a raccoon, we would attempt every, thing that we could to trap that raccoon and keep an eye on it as far as its behavior and if it had rabies, and that would not be domesticated. So those are just some examples.
So the next section is jumping all the way to 5-42. And in the blue text memo, it was suggested that we add an entire new subpart to that section that came from the Sanford Code. And that was a good suggestion that we adopted. And the red line version is shown on the ordinance. And then I added on to that addition from the Sanford Code, something that Riley shared with me is sometimes there are city permitted sales or adoption events throughout the city. And so I wanted to add that I included that into the new language. So we added Sanford's Code section as the blue memo asked for, and then even enhanced it a little bit specific to our jurisdiction. The next is we were also asked to consider adding adoption-based business model to section 5-42. And after the officers read that, they felt that was unnecessary for our jurisdiction, and that what we already included in 542 supplies them with what they need. The next topic is 5-43, tethering. So so we're back to where we began originally with tethering. So we made no changes to tethering, and that's when Tanya was going to get into detail about tethering.
Okay, so in reference to tethering, we have had maybe 2 cases that I'm aware of in reference to 24/7 tethering. And when it comes to tethering, we have gone to cases where someone's reported somebody has tethered an animal, but it hasn't been for any length of time once our investigation was concluded. And we're trying to make sure that we do cover that, the concerns of an animal that is tethered for too long. We want to make sure that we don't allow that to happen. Again, we're fortunate in this area that has not happened. And I feel, and Chris can tell what he thinks, but after going over this whole division on tethering, we feel like we've covered every basis that we can as far as our tools to engage on a case in reference to somebody tethering.
Right. I mean, I felt that after what the officers shared with me, that the way that we have our tethering drafted seemed to work for what our city is and has been dealing with, and what foreseeably they may encounter based on their history and their field work. So along with what the officers were telling me, we collectively felt that there was no change to be made. But this links back to the additional information we received from Councilmember Golding on tethering. So there is a lot of additional information for the officers and I to review, if you'd like us to review the additional information. And perhaps this is one of the topics that we should come back to later after you've adopted this ordinance. And as Councilmember Dumont mentioned, perhaps we come back with an amendment to this. Well, tethering may be one of the first sections that City Council directs us to amend and change. But at this point, I feel like we should go forward with the way we have tethering in our.
I'd like to add just one more thing is keep in mind too, we are very fortunate with our 9 square miles and our animal control officers. They're pretty good about monitoring all areas of the beach. So we stay on top of it very much so. So, you know, just to put you at ease a little bit there is we're pretty on top of most animal complaints or things that they even observe when they're out riding around. They're very proactive as far as addressing any of those issues. But it's definitely something that we can look at further when we have a chance to look at what you added.
Councilor Golding.
Again, what I've said before is, you know, I know our officers are doing a great job, but right now as it is, our code allows tethering 24/7. The code, they can't point to anything in the code that they can say, oh, by the way, our code says you can't do this. So that's just my biggest concern. I would really like to see us address this. If it's not addressed in the first reading, I would really like to see it done as soon as possible, because the bottom line is our code allows 24/7 tethering. And I know our officers can't be everywhere all the time. And then you have issues like what Mr. Stokes ran into, you know. So this is a hill I am probably going to die on, but because it's important to me. So if we don't do it now, I want to see us do it, you know, as soon as we can.
How difficult is it to just add no 24/7 tethering, or what do we call attended tethering only, or is it that difficult to add that? So it's not, can't we just throw it in as a letter?
Well, and actually that's what some cities have, is they do just have, like you said, a letter. It says the dog cannot be, you know, on a tether unless an owner is outside with the dog and within visual sight of the dog. That's just one little subsection of the tethering. And then they go on and say the tether can't be more than 1/8 of the weight of the dog, and it needs to be a certain length and blah, 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 without getting. Now, the thing is that Jacksonville got into they got into actually specifying what the tether's like, but that's because they wanted to make sure that for safety reasons, that it was a type of tether that would allow a dog to actually escape from a threat and not actually be in a situation like the photo in the memo that I shared, where this dog is just tied to the stake all the time, and it's all it can do is run around in a certain small area, and that's it.
Chris, is it difficult to add a letter here stating that an animal cannot be tethered 24/7, or it has to, it can only be tethered if if its human is in eyesight?
Yeah, it's not difficult to change that. We can add that.
Well, and here's the thing too, I'd like to add that when I talked to the animal control chief in Jacksonville, she said to put a time limit on the tethering, you know, to say they can't be tethered 24/7, that's a little harder to enforce. But to actually say that the owner has to be outside and within visual sight of the dog, that is something that is enforceable. So if we can add something like that, then that definitely goes a long way towards
You're not dying
the 24 tethering. Yeah, and yeah, I'm not going to necessarily die on a hill then. Yeah.
Right. So Riley shared with me that she's aware of owners that do have their pets tethered, but they're not necessarily outside with their pets. And she's aware of very docile, calm dogs, for example, that are tethered in the city, and the owners allow them to be tethered on a nice long leash around their gated fence, and dog doesn't bark, dog hasn't caused any problems, very docile, but has a lot of room to move about. Meanwhile, the owner is in the garage working, for example. And so Riley said that she's very comfortable with not having any of those requirements that are suggested. So that's why we didn't include them.
I would include it. I know that she's comfortable with it, but I would also include this under bureaucratic discretion. The reason why we dropped something else, that if somebody has their dog tethered and they're not in eyesight, that's fine. If the animal control officer looks and sees that there's no problem, there's no need for action. It's when there is a problem, like a candidate for city council approaching your door to go knock or to put a hanger on there, and you have a dog that snaps at you. Now there was no human in eyesight, and now you have something to back up an action by the city.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that there was no fence. There was a tethered. There's no attended, and that was not a docile dog. So I can say there is at least one situation that was me literally just walking up to, like Councilmember Dumont said, knock on the door, leave a flyer, posing no harm or risk, and was, viciously attacked to the point where I was legitimately scared. And I'm a lot bigger than the dog, but I was scared. That's fight or flight situation, and I fled, and it still caught me.
So we'll draft language and we'll include that on the first reading ordinance. You'll see that in the section 5-43 under tethering. And then if you'd like, if that language doesn't match with what you'd like to see, then we can revise it, and it won't cause us to circle back to another first reading. We can proceed with the second reading.
I just want to follow up. That's the whole point of the attended tethering, is that you have somebody outside that can intervene and make sure that there aren't any issues. And so had that been the case in Mr. Stokes' situation, then there would have been a person outside who could have intervened. So again, that's another reason for attended tethering.
Okay, we'll draft it up. So
You don't think this edges on property rights, do you?
No, it's a public safety matter.
I would say, oh, sorry.
No, yeah, I was gonna say we can regulate it for exactly for those purposes. Is there's no expectation of privacy or any property rights where there's not a closed gate or a secured gate. And in the example of Councilmember Stokes, he didn't breach any fence or break any fence or go through any gated or locked fence. He just walked up to a standard open walkway to a front door. And there's no expectation of privacy or property rights with respect to stopping someone from just going to your front door.
Sure, and I wasn't referencing his particular case, but I think that we got to be careful with property rights when it comes to something like that. Especially if you have a gated front yard or something like that.
Yeah, I think we'll be all right. We'll put it in there. We'll give it a shot. And if there's trouble, then we can always revise it and revisit it.
I just wanted to say, Chris, I appreciate you looking at this so that Sandy doesn't have to die on the hill tonight, and that we can get closer to something that works. But to me, I would like this to be simple and something that really just gives our animal control officers some leverage if there is abuse going on, because I think the line of sight is very subjective. If somebody puts their dog outside on the leash and walks to the back of the house to do their dishes, I don't think that's what we're talking about here. So I think it needs to be something where Riley or whoever the animal control officer has that discretion to say, this is abuse. I don't have to sit here and watch this for 24 hours or whatever, that they can make that determination. I understand why the time limit is a challenge, but I would just say simple is better, and something simple that we can all agree on, that we don't have to pull this thing back open again in 6 months would be great.
Absolutely. And in this circumstance, if Councilmember Golding would like to email to me what you would like added based on our group discussion here tonight, then the officers and I will consider it, and then we'll put it in. So you feel free to send us what you'd like to see added to this section.
One simple bullet.
Yep. Next section is also in 4.3, section 5-4.3. It's 3, abandonment, and we just corrected a word there to make more sense. It was cats apart from the community and that are a part of the community. We made that fix. The next section is the blue memo mentioned 5-4.4, and this is cruelty on animals, and we made no changes there because the way that 5.4.4 is currently drafted seems to, it's a very long, detailed section, -44, and the officers were very firm on, they felt comfortable with that as a working section for them. So we didn't add or change any of the suggestions from the blue note. And Tanya, the main change was the phrase placed in a secured crate or cage that allows for proper ventilation. And I think we had everything covered already to your satisfaction.
Yeah, my suggestion was strictly to make it a little clearer by moving it, just because, but I'm fine with leaving it the way it is.
Okay. And then the next is 5-5.2, and this is rabies. And the title was rabies vaccination tag required for Paws Dog Park. But we changed that because now rabies vaccination is required. And we just have that as the new title. We took out the reference to Paws Dog Park. And we don't have that now as a sort of as a prescriptive condition of being Paws Dog Park. We have rabies vaccination required. The next change is in 5-5.3. We changed a period for confinement when found to be rabid from 2 weeks to 10 days, and we made that consistent throughout the code. We did not make any change to to include Neptune Beach's domesticated animal. The officers explained that they don't want to try to adopt Neptune Beach's code in that instance with respect to domesticated animals. And Tanya, you can add if you'd like to that. And that's the last item on the blue memo.
Can I just ask, because I would like some clarification. I don't understand what the difference is between 529 and 553. They both seem to be talking about situations involving a bite. So I wanted to understand why we have, what each of those sections are doing, or what, I guess, why we would have the two different sections. And that was part of my question in the blue memo. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that. Because they're both talking about bite and quarantine, but both sections.
Councilman Golding, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? What is your question in reference to two references?
Yeah, so we have two sections. One is 5-29, which is talking about bites and quarantine.
Okay.
And then 5-53 is talking about bites and quarantine. And so I didn't quite understand what the difference was between those two sections, and almost made me wonder if we couldn't just have one section and one of those could actually go away. What if there was any kind of value in one of those sections versus the other, or both are different in some way and I'm just not seeing it.
The biggest difference is that the latter one, 5-53, is under the actual vaccination and rabies section. So it felt empty if we didn't include something that speaks to quarantine under that section. I feel like it needs to be stated in two different places because the two topics are different. The two article topics
It also seemed to me that it covered known rabies versus unknown rabies. Like we're watching, one's for observation, one is a known case of rabies, one that has been infected with rabies.
Mhm.
Maybe that's part of it as well.
Yes, it could be read that way as well. Yes, absolutely. Right. One is suspected and one is confirmed.
So when it comes down, you're correct on that. And when it comes down to it, there's going to be specific where there's obvious signs of rabies. And then there's one where you have a bite and you have no clue if there's going to be rabies. And that's when we sit and we watch. Whereas the other one is pretty evident there's going to be rabies and we take the appropriate action when it comes to that.
Okay, thank you.
So there will be a couple of changes that we'll make to the animal rescue organization and animal shelter definition. That speaks to, nor do they obtain the animals from a broker or a breeder. And then Councilwoman Golding will provide us with a sentence that she suggests we insert, as we mentioned. And then otherwise, we're going to have this ordinance to you for the March 15th first reading. And asking you to approve it and move it forward for second reading as soon as possible. Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have any final comments on the animal ordinance before we move on to topic 4?
Chris, thank you. And Tanya and Riley, thank you very much for the 9 months worth of work you've put into this, minus that one sentence on
Yeah.
that Sandy's going to send you. Just that
You're
one
welcome.
little sentence with a letter in front of it. It's going to be perfect.
Yep. I have a new chapter for bald eagles coming to you next month.
Oh, perfect.
No. Thank you all.
Good work, Chris.
I totally second what Ms. Dumont says. I mean, everybody knows that this is an area that is in my wheelhouse, or I work in animal welfare, so this is something that is very important to me, and so I really appreciate the patience and answering the questions, and I'm looking forward to getting this rewritten.
We'll have it to you for March 15th.
Councilor Jansen, you have your hand raised?
Yes, in closing, a little story for you. When I was on patrol in the mid-90s, got called to an individual who was he had a pet python, why I brought it up earlier, who had wrapped himself around his owner, caused a compound fracture in his arm, and was basically squeezing him to death. So I had to shoot the snake in order to save this individual's life. Hence the reason why, you never know what somebody's going to have as a pet and what you're going to have to do. And it's probably as rare as a tethering incident in Jacksonville Beach, but it does happen. Fun story.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chris, Tanya, thank you guys for the Chapter 5 review. And that'll bring us to our fourth and final item of the night, which is an overview of the proposed vision and mission statements for the city of Jacksonville Beach. Quick update for those who may be watching this for the first time, but back on February 27th, we held a retreat with the city council, and the retreat was facilitated by representatives from the Florida Institute of Government. The purpose of that exercise was to develop a vision statement for the community of Jacksonville Beach and to come up with a new mission statement for the organization. 2 draft statements were developed coming out of that meeting. The first one was the vision statement of a vibrant coastal community that embraces the beach life, and the draft mission statement of innovative government that is transparent and responsive while focused on safety, infrastructure, and environmental stewardship. The facilitator asked that we all take a little bit of time to go back and review those 2 draft statements and see if those were the ones we wanted to proceed forward with. For the purposes of the organization, the executive leadership team, and you'll notice that they're all on the call tonight because this is important to the organization, we actually held a review of the documents and went through some of our own exercises on Tuesday of last week. With regard to the vision statement, we thought it was perfect, and we had no recommendations to council that should be changed, especially since it reflects the vision for the community. With regard to the mission statement, however, we did have some changes that we proposed to it. And there's a revised statement that you have in front of you tonight with regard to that. Responsive government focused on safety, service, and sustainability. And we also tried to provide council some of the background as to why we changed it, and specifically what we changed it to. So with that, we would open the floor to discussion from council to see whether or not you've taken some time over the past week to think about those two statements as well, and where we go from here. And the first hand that I see raised is Councilor Dumont, followed by Mayor Hoffman.
Thank you, Mike. I just want to reiterate for those who are watching, it looks like we have no extra attendees, but this is recorded. So Beach's leader and the rest of the media are going to watch this to get your information. Prior to our retreat, we went through all those visioning sessions. We assessed that information a couple different times, and it was from the information from our residents, our businesses, and those within the community that we were able to develop that vision statement from. It wasn't easy. It was, Chet said that his head hurt after a while. But the community vision came from you, all of our residents and business owners and such. So it's not just the 7 of us getting together and throwing some words together. That said, I like the vision statement, and I also agree with, I like shorter. I agree with the revised mission statement. It's cleaner. It's got nice alliteration, safety, service, sustainability. So I like those kinds of things. So I support them both.
Mayor Hoffman.
And thank you for including the summaries of the visioning meetings again in this packet, because it was really nice to go back after the fact and look at those again and see how true I really feel like we stayed to those during our meeting. And after the meeting, as I kind of let things percolate, I love the vision statement even more than I did at the meeting. I'm already starting to think about how it can apply to things that we're already talking about in our future. And the hashtag just really writes itself. So I love the vision statement as it is. The mission statement never really landed with me. And I think I struggled with that innovative as the first line or the first word. So I think the staff's work on it and their proposed revision really nails it and broadens things a little bit that are really more true to what the work that we're doing as an organization. So I fully support the revised mission statement and thank the department heads for helping us out. We were a little punchy at the end of the day after 7 hours of working on this. So if we'd started over again in the morning, we might have been able to flesh it out. But I think the department heads really brought it home, and it's and especially after sitting there watching us go through the whole process, I think that was a really important kind of last leg of that journey. So I support both of them as they are.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem Nichols, followed by Councilor Meza.
Just a quick question. Do we need punctuation at the end of those? A vibrant coastal community that embraces the beach life. Should there be like a period, exclamation point? I mean,
good question. I know we added an Oxford comma, so I don't think there's a problem.
At the end, I'm not sure if we need something, or is it the beach life exclamation point, or
maybe some sandals?
What'd you say? A pair of sandals?
A couple emojis in there. No, just kidding. But I mean, I just don't know. Is it standard to have punctuation at the end of a vision and a mission statement?
We'll do some checking on that. That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
And I'm okay with pineapple emojis too. Don't get me wrong.
And Councilor Nichols, your thoughts on the vision and the mission statement as presented?
No, I like them. I'm fine with the changes to the mission statement. It's yeah, I think it's more for the city, and I think it does meet what we're trying to do, where we're trying to go.
Great. Counselor Meza.
I love our vision statement and our mission statement even better. So I'm with it and very impressed by the staff. It was pretty neat.
Excellent. Counselor Stokes, followed by Counselor Dumont.
I think when you go back and look at the visioning meetings that were conducted with all of the residents and business owners, our vision statement really starts to resonate. And when you look at the comments that were prevalent throughout, the beach life, it kind of encompasses all of that without diving into every single point. So I really like that we buckled down, and yes, as Councilor Dumont said, that was I slept really good that night after 7 hours of visioning, and really I think all of us probably did because we put a lot of work into that day, and then y'all took a good mission statement and really made it into a great mission statement. And the explanation provided really cleared it up. And I think y'all did a great work. So I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for helping us out after our 7 hours was winding down and we were really struggling. So I'm really happy that with how both came out, and I'm looking forward to getting these out into the field and adopted.
Excellent. Thank you. Mayor Hoffman, I see your hand is still raised. Did I skip you? No. Okay, we'll move on. Counselor Dumont, followed by Counselor Jansen.
I wasn't going to mention it, but you missed the Oxford comma. Corey brought it up. You're missing it. We agreed. It's city communication policy. Service needs a comma after it. I'm going to be quiet now.
Wait, is it policy? I think we're going to need to debate this one.
That's what Jacob said at the retreat when we were discussing the use of do we or do we not use the Oxford comma, and he says we do. I put a thumbs up, but it's missing.
Yeah, actually,
I think we could have Chris draft some legislation to make it policy.
Jacob's going to fight for this one.
The version that went to you doesn't have it, but I have another draft of this memo where it is in there. We'll make sure it's in the final. Counselor Jansen, followed by Counselor Golding.
I just wanted to give you my vote of approval on both of them, and I absolutely think our vision statement is fantastic, and I'm with the rest of the councilors who have already spoken that I'm anxious to get the hashtag out there and really start selling it. So I'm looking forward to it. Good work on the mission statement too.
Thank you. And Counselor Golding.
I support both. And I will say this, I have to be totally honest though, I struggled with the mission statement a little bit because the word transparent is just a word that I feel is really important. And I think citizens, they use the word transparent, and they feel that transparency is so important in government. And so not having it in there, yeah, I struggled with it. I'm happy with the safety, service, and sustainability. I really like that. But I'm willing to accept the mission statement because I know the department heads did a great job with it. Did a much better job than we did, but I just had to be honest that the transparency thing was just something that I guess I just struggle with it a little bit.
Thank you. And to reiterate to council, I know we put it in the memo. It's a little separated from where it is in the memo. But one of the reasons that staff felt okay from removing it from the mission statement, one of the reasons was that it is within our core values under communication, that we have open and honest dialogue with our community as well as with our elected officials, staff, et cetera. So while it may not be in the mission statement, it is still a fundamental expectation of the core values of being a Jacksonville Beach employee. And that's something that everyone should take to heart, that we take those values seriously. Councilor Golding.
So is this something that will be published to the public so the public will see this mission? And if so, would we also go ahead and outline the core values too, so that it kind of supports the mission and the public can actually see how, you know, it's a little more than just those, what, 7 or 8 words, right?
That was going to be my next question to council. Now that we have a vision statement and a mission statement, would you like us to prepare a resolution for council consideration to formally adopt those 2 statements? And when we put the agenda memo packet together, we would include not only what the city's core values are, but we would also attach the community conversations report from November of 2020 as backup documentation. Are you all comfortable with us preparing that as a resolution? I see heads nodding and thumbs up. Fantastic. Okay, that wraps up item number 4 and puts us right at about the 2-hour mark. So are you all ready for item 5? Good, because there is no item 5 on the agenda tonight. We are done with our council briefing. Thank you all for taking the time for this evening. We have our regular council meeting next Monday night, 6 o'clock in person in the council chambers. We look forward to seeing everyone in the public there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great week. Stay safe during Players Week.